A French serial killer became one of the country's most dangerous, most wanted criminals in just 40 hours. But unlike a psychopath who chooses victims at random, he carefully stalked them, following a plan he had been nurturing for many years. He was driven by a desire to take revenge on those he considered responsible for his professional failures, and especially for his ruined life. This is the unusual case of Gabriel Fortin, the HR department killer. It all began on January 26, 2021, in Wolfgantzen, in the Alsace region, in the parking lot of Knauf, a company specializing in top-of-the-line thermal insulation. It was 6 p.m., the end of the workday. Employees, slowly leaving the building to head home, noticed that their colleague, Estelle Loose, was sitting in her car with the headlights on and the engine running, not moving. When they came closer, they saw that Estelle was unconscious and her face was covered in blood. Her co-workers hurried to call an ambulance. The first rescue workers arrived very quickly, but they could no longer help her. 4 bullets fired into her head left her no chance. Worst of all, she had just messaged her children to say she was on her way home. The police who arrived found 9mm shell casings. The parking lot was unguarded. There were no security cameras and no one had heard the shots. But at exactly 5:47 p.m., one employee had noticed a car, an Asian make, either red or orange. What had happened seemed unbelievable for Wolfgantzen, practically a village of 1,000 people, where crime was virtually non-existent. All the more so because the victim was the HR director of a major company. 39-year-old Estelle devoted all her time to work and to her family, her beloved husband and children. And no one could believe something like this could happen to her. And no one could have imagined that while the police were only just heading to the crime scene, the killer was already speeding toward the home of the next victim. Imagine that the next delivery driver who pulls up to your house instead of handing over the food you ordered opens fire on you. An experience, an experiment really, that I think many of us would happily live without. Yet on January 26, 2021, Bertrand Michel experienced exactly that. That evening, the man was just finishing work. Because of the raging coronavirus pandemic, he was working remotely from his home. The doorbell rang. Bertrand got up and went to open the door. Standing outside was a man wearing glasses, a cap, and a mask. He was holding a pizza box in his hands. Bertrand had not ordered any pizza, so he assumed the courier wanted to ask something about his neighbors. But the man asked whether his name was Bertrand Michel. Bertrand did not even have time to answer in the affirmative before a sound rang out, similar to a firecracker exploding. Despite the mask, Bertrand saw the man's facial expression change to one of surprise. The courier abruptly turned around and ran. Bertrand rushed after him, barefoot in his socks. He caught up with the courier and grabbed him, but the man managed to break free, jump into a car, lock himself inside, and speed away. Bertrand banged on the window and tried to make out the license plate number, but since he had been wounded, blood was blurring his vision, and he had to abandon the attempt. He only noted that it was a small red car of Japanese or Korean manufacture. Bertrand picked up the glasses, cap, surgical mask, and the pizza box the courier had dropped. When he approached the door of his house, he noticed a large hole. Only then did he realize that the sound he had heard had not been a firecracker. The supposed courier had been a killer, and if it hadn't been for the pizza box under which the murderer had hidden the gun, Bertrand would have been dead. He called the police. The officers assumed that the criminal's gun had jammed because he had not simply hidden it under the box, but had glued it to it. During their conversation with Bertrand, the gendarmes noted with surprise that this was the second such attack that evening, something that had practically never happened in Alsace, and that the first victim had died. Bertrand realized with bitterness that they were talking about Estelle. Bertrand and Estelle had met 15 years earlier when Bertrand was the HR director at a subsidiary of Emerson Group near Chartres. Estelle had been Bertrand's intern. She had learned everything from him. He remembered her as a very intelligent and hard-working employee. The attack on Bertrand and the murder of his former intern, which took place 50 kilometers apart, could not have been a mere coincidence. The detectives decided to examine the list of all employees who might have been dismissed as a result of the work of Bertrand and Estelle. There turned out to be more than 300 such people. Fortunately, the list was significantly narrowed down to a small number of individuals, among whom Bertrand recognized his attacker, 48-year-old Gabriel Fortin. Who was this man, and why did he attack two people in the course of a single evening? Gabriel Fortin essentially did not know his father, a native of Gabon who had come to Marseille in search of a better life. In France, the man met Francine Fortin, and the couple had two children. After the birth of the younger one, Gabriel, the man returned to Gabon, where he apparently had another family. Francine raised her sons alone and kept a very close eye on their studies, allowing no leniency whatsoever. While checking young Gabriel's homework, she could insult the child, or even resort to physical violence. For example, if he made a mistake while reading, his mother would slap him. When the grown young man finally obtained an engineering degree, he was convinced that he would now secure the place in society that he deserved. He placed great hopes on his new job, yet he himself did not strive to become a good employee. His direct supervisor, to his credit, tried in every possible way to help him, attempted to integrate the newcomer into the team, and eventually warned him that things could not go on like this. But Gabriel was consistently incompetent and caused the team to waste time. In 2006, he was dismissed. This happened 20 years ago, but it was the most difficult conversation Bertrand Michel had had to conduct in all 37 years of his career. When Gabriel entered the office, Bertrand asked whether he would mind if his intern, Estelle Loose, were present during the conversation. The discussion lasted 2.5 hours, and during that entire time, Estelle did not utter a single word. She only observed. Nothing like this had happened to Bertrand either before or after. The employee was completely detached from reality. In all project failures, someone else was always to blame, but never him. He refused to accept the dismissal and perceived what was happening as a terrible injustice. He hired 2 lawyers to challenge the employer's decision in court, but he did not see the case through to the end. Perhaps it was because he had found a new job. He was hired by F1 Environnement, a French company specializing in the manufacture of equipment for the collection, transportation, and processing of waste. Gabriel Fortin once again allowed himself to dream of the rapid climb up the career ladder he so desperately desired. But his happiness was short-lived. His skills were once again called into question. His manager concluded that he did not match what was written in his resume and could not understand why the engineer had been hired at all. After only a few months, the man was dismissed. The HR director, Geraldine Cacklin, held a meeting with him, but as in the previous case, the man refused to accept his dismissal. Geraldine was forced to literally escort him out of the building and walk him to the parking lot, explaining that he was no longer an employee of the company. Having endured a humiliating dismissal and once again lost his source of income, the man registered with the employment center in order to receive benefits. And this is very important because 2 days after the murder of Estelle and the attack on Bertrand, Gabriel Fortin visited the employment center in Valance where he had previously been registered. While the police were actively searching for the shooter in the Alsace region, on January 28th, 500 kilometers away from them, a gunshot rang out in an employment agency in Valance. At 8:45 a.m., a man wearing a jacket, a cap, glasses, and a surgical mask entered the employment center and approached the registration desk, holding out an identity card in the name of Arzavi Rashida. The man's other hand was almost completely concealed by a bag that he was pressing tightly against himself. No more than 5 minutes after entering the building, he stood up and headed straight for the office where Patricia Pesquion, the director of benefits and compensation, was located. Patricia had just celebrated her 54th birthday. She was a happy, loving wife and the mother of 2 teenage daughters. As with Estelle, she had no chance. Gabriel Fortin, who was in fact the person hiding behind the fake identity, killed Patricia with a single shot. Panic immediately broke out in the building. Some people hid. Others tried to chase the shooter, but the killer escaped too quickly. Fortunately, one employee noticed the license plate number of the car speeding away. The police were convinced that they were dealing with a serial killer. But when would this horror end? Apparently, not right away. For the shooter was on the move again. He was speeding toward his former company, Fawn Environment, in the Ardèche department. Still holding the bag pressed tightly against himself, he entered the building, introduced himself as Arzavi Rashid, and asked for an opportunity to meet with his former manager. Fortunately for the manager, he no longer worked there. Gabriel then moved on to Plan B, namely, the woman who had been involved in his dismissal, Geraldine Cacklin, who had been forced to escort him to the parking lot when he refused to accept being fired. He said that he would like to see her. However, the employee at the reception desk found the man suspicious and decided to warn the woman by going to her office. Gabriel, too, evidently sensed that something was wrong and, without waiting for permission to go upstairs, headed toward Geraldine's office. The killer spotted his victim from a distance and opened fire. Screams and chaos followed. Geraldine and one of her colleagues tried to take cover and lock themselves inside the office, behind a glass door. Of course, a single shot was enough to shatter what remained of the door. Both women begged him not to shoot, but Gabriel seemed not to hear them. He quickly fired several bullets into Geraldine and struck her on the chin, apparently also intending to disfigure her. After that, he fled. Geraldine, the HR director, died in hospital at the age of 51, leaving 2 children without their mother. The detectives knew the color and the license plate number of the suspect's car. It was located on a bridge in Valance. One of the police vehicles ended up directly in front of him, and the officers decided to ram Gabriel's red car. The collision was fairly strong, but no one was injured. The officers took advantage of the moment to pull the suspect out of the vehicle and arrest him calmly. A quick search revealed a large number of 9mm cartridges on the passenger seat. On the floor lay a Glock, which had clearly slid there from the front passenger seat, where Gabriel had thrown it after killing Geraldine. The arrested man gave his name and date of birth, and then did not say another word. He chose not to cooperate with the investigation in any way. Investigators found it difficult to understand the silent killer, despite numerous interrogations. How could someone turn into a serial killer in just a few hours? What could have gone through his mind to create such a bloody scenario? Gabriel did not want to explain his motives, and the investigators were forced to dig into his past and gather numerous witness statements in order to understand the man behind it all. The officers carried out searches of his homes in Nancy and Valance, seizing his diaries and all electronic devices. This allowed them to understand what had been happening in the man's life and in his mind after his second dismissal. Gabriel was unemployed. The benefits helped him get by for a while, but since he was not looking for a new job, he eventually had to move back in with his mother. Gradually, he withdrew into himself and distanced himself from his friends. Employment no longer interested him. Instead, he began to harass HR employees by creating fake accounts. In particular, the police discovered fake profiles that he had run in the names of Bertrand and Estelle. It was precisely them whom he blamed for his dismissal. He believed they were devoid of humanity and fired people without caring about the consequences. His constant occupation became smearing their names. It went so far that in 2017, Estelle was forced to completely leave social media. Gabriel believed that he had become the victim of a vast conspiracy, that he was being wiretapped, and that these records would permanently prevent him from finding a job. And the cherry on top, people were breaking into his home while he was away, collecting confidential information about him. The free time he now had in abundance was not spent on video games or anything of the sort. No, his hobby was shooting. Since 2014, he had been a regular at a shooting range, a fixture at a shooting club. It is possible that as early as 2014 he was already developing his plan for revenge against the HR department, because once he had learned how to handle firearms, he began stalking his victims. He physically followed each intended victim, recording their working hours, the places they visited, where their children studied, and so on. The only exception was Patricia Pasquian, who had never handled his case and did not know him personally. However, the police concluded that the target of the attack was the employment center itself, where the woman worked, not Patricia personally. From the very beginning, investigators also wondered why there was an entire day between the first series of attacks and the second. What had Gabriel been doing during that time? They are almost certain that the number of victims could have been much higher. Among the attacks he had planned was the murder of his former girlfriend, with whom he had briefly dated a very long time ago. A surveillance camera captured Gabriel at a gas station 10 kilometers from her home. The woman owes her survival solely to the fact that she had moved 6 months earlier. Gabriel also wanted to take revenge on 2 lawyers who had refused to take on his wrongful dismissal case. Finally, he had his sights set on the public prosecutor in Valance, who had not bothered to respond to his letters. Judging by what Gabriel wrote in his diary, that to reach the public prosecutor's office one had to pass through the corridor of the remand prison and go up 2 floors. If the police car had not rammed him on the bridge, the prosecutor would have been his next victim. By stopping the red car in this way, the gendarmes put an end to the killing spree. Detectives also concluded that, having taken revenge on his offenders, Gabriel intended to die, as he had left farewell notes to his older brother and his mother. After his arrest, the man gave only his name and date of birth, after which he quite literally fell silent and did not utter a single word, neither during interrogations at the police station, nor to his lawyer, nor in court. His older brother claimed that, like their mother, Gabriel suffered from paranoia and schizophrenia. He saw no point in speaking to people who, from his point of view, were part of a conspiracy against him. Nevertheless, despite medical conclusions that the man was not in his right mind at the time of the murders, the sentence was not reduced. Gabriel Fortin was sentenced to life imprisonment and must spend a minimum of 22 years in prison before he can apply for parole. He filed an appeal the same day, but unsuccessfully. The verdict remained in force.